Now let me get this disclaimer out of the way. Cuphead was already one of the best video games I've ever played. Beautiful love letter to video games and animation, Cuphead impresses with its clever concept and astonishing art style, and is still able to stick the landing and become one of the best run-and gun shooters ever made. From tight and responsive controls to incredibly detailed and intense boss fights, this game not only wears its ambition on its sleeve, but succeeds in delivering an experience that certainly cements it as a gaming classic. Ooh, big words, I know, and I mean every one of them. I've never played a game that has consistently kept me this engaged in every part of what it had to offer, and I'm more than happy to share that the DLC, cheekily titled The Delicious Last Course, takes a perfect game and somehow makes it even better. Originally announced for a 2019 release, The Delicious Last Course was finally released on June 29th and received critical acclaim just as the original game did. Studio MDHR wasn't daunted by their long development, and for good reason. This DLC is just as polished and impressive as the base game, and I'm more than happy to say that it is well worth the wait. The base game of Cuphead was a challenge in itself to get through, but the DLC feels like a proper footnote right after beating the final boss of the game. And while it is possible to begin the DLC as early as Isle 1, I would not recommend it, especially if you've never played Cuphead or haven't played in a while. The bosses featured this time are just as charming and wonderfully animated just as the ones in the base game, but are also in some cases even more challenging. Averaging from 3 to 4 phases for each boss, these battles in actuality can be completed in under 2 minutes, but the amount of attack patterns and trial and error it will take before you fully learn how these bosses work is definitely overwhelming at first. Some of these phases are truly insane, and that only makes defeating them just that more rewarding. There are 12 new battles to struggle through, and not in a bad way. With brand new gimmicks and the same lively animation as before, these boss fights quickly become some of my favorite to fight, especially the King of Games champions, which provide a twist on boss fights and the mausoleum challenges from the base game. Instead of protecting Miss Chalice from a horde of ghosts weak to parrying, you now battle against a group of bosses that also just so happen to be weak against parrying. In fact, that's the only way to damage these enemies, and by restricting the player's options, it ironically leads to some more clever and memorable boss fights, making the DLC from feeling too samey, especially if the traditional boss fights were starting to become too burdensome. Just like the run and gun levels before, these fights were a great breather if you'd rather not just fight the rest of the bosses back to back. Oh, and speaking of Miss Chalice, the best new feature to the game allows you to play as her. Her moveset takes some of the difficulty off of most boss fights, as evading difficult attacks and her improved mobility makes her somewhat of an easier character, especially throughout the DLC's Isle 4. But the game manages to strike a balance with her, because despite her advantages over the main duo, she never feels overpowered. She has a double jump, yes, but her initial jump is more of a hop than a jump, jumping much lower than Cuphead and Mugman. And while her dash parry is convenient for maneuvering around or sometimes against a boss, you are forced to change how you approach fights now, as some parries might put you in a bad position simply because you have to hit it straight on instead of bouncing on top of it. These subtle changes balance Miss Chalice out and make her as viable as the main duo. The new items available might give you an even bigger edge over enemies, as they all do superb damage in a short amount of time, and combats excellently with the crowd control the game asks of you throughout the DLC. And while I won't spoil the specifics of each new weapon, I will say if you manage to find all of the secrets on Isle 4, you're in for a fantastic treat. Now, I spent most of this video talking about the gameplay and everything, but I don't mean to overlook the fantastic art direction and an equally wonderful original score by Christopher Madigan, who at this point has convinced me that he can do no wrong when it comes to providing a blissful and truly magical sounding body of art in the form of his composition. Just give it a listen to the soundtrack, and you can tell how much love was put into this project. It's so satisfying. That's all I'll say for now without spoiling too much, but believe me when I tell you the Delicious Last Course is not only the perfect way to footnote the base of the game of Cuphead, but manages to improve on about every aspect of its already perfect formula.